Hey, I'm Julian Kunkel. So I'm from the University of Reading, but I'm also a member of the OSSG, which is the open source specialist group. And I'm very pleased to be invited today to talk a little bit about open source software. So a lot of stuff that you hear today will be my personal opinion, but so I will mark that specifically such that you understand this. And there's also a good section about the OSSG. So in that sense, so I will talk firstly a bit about open and free software, what this is. I'm not quite sure if everyone is aware about it. Then I will talk about the open source specialist group. And then I will talk about my personal experience, of which one I already gave to you regarding GoToWebinar. And then we wrap up the talk. Here there is also a little part where I want to discuss. So I pose some questions as part of the member of OSSG committee. I will pose some questions where we try to expand and try to think about how to approach community and such. And maybe at the end of the talk, then we will have a little discussion. All right, so let's get started. What is free software? And free often stands for freedom software. So the Free Software Foundation, FSF, says that it's software that can be used, copied, studied, modified, and redistributed, free as in free speech. But it doesn't mean it is not available for any charge. So it can mean that you have to pay for it, but then you can use it, you can copy it, you can study it, and so on. That implies that the source code must be open. And there are a lot of licenses out there that are permissive nowadays, like GPL, MIT, and the Creative Commons. I hope some of you know Creative Commons CC licenses. So there is a big ecosystem of free software. An example is the GNU project, which is a free software mass collaboration project founded by Richard Stallman at MIT in 1983. Back then, they had these big mainframes running with special Unix software that was tied to a manufacturer. And it was quite annoying as a user when you come from one machine to another one and you don't get any, the software changes drastically. So then they had the idea to give users more freedom and control their use of their computers and computing devices, creating this set of software tools, basically. So why does open and freedom matter for us? So regarding software, it gives us the liberty to work with software. So you can, as a student, for example, you can learn from others. Of course, if there is a problem, you can patch bugs. You can also enhance functionality or port it to other hardware. And lastly, you can quickly prototype anything, basically by standing on shoulders of giants that have written a rich set of software ecosystem. Yeah, imagine nowadays you want to write a little software, whatever you do, and you would not have standard libraries for C, Java, Python, or what have you, right? We all use those software as given and are happy because otherwise we would have to write very simple input-output functionality or even stuff like matrix additions by ourselves. That's quite annoying. So next point is that it increases the trust into software, generally speaking. By being able to inspect the software, you can check if the software is correct. Does it do what you want it to do? Does it respect my privacy, for instance? We know with the COVID app, for instance, in Germany, the software had been open sourced after it had been developed. And I think it's the same here. The NHS app is also open sourced because people have, of course, privacy concerns if there's permanently an app on, and it does kind of scan where they are walking and what they are doing, right? All right. That does not necessarily mean, by the way, that all the software is perfect. Yeah, no software is bug-free, and that applies to commercial software, proprietary software, so as well as open source software. Yeah, there have been bugs, prominent bugs that can be named like the Heartbleed bug in OpenSSL, which are really, which have been widely spread. But again, we know that any software has bugs, and by hiding the source code, it doesn't make it more safe. Yeah, it's just hiding the possible kind of visibility that there is a bug. Okay. Lastly, that is a very important point for me personally. I'd say preventing vendor login. Yeah. How do you handle unwilling bankrupt companies? Or how to handle a company that does not give you support anymore? Yeah. Windows XP support goes away, Windows 7.1 support goes away, but you have software bought by another company that needs Windows 7.1. Right? How can you deal with this? Yeah. Theoretically, if it is open software, you can provide unlimited support for such a software, because either you do it, and if you are not well capable of it because you are not a programmer, well, you could hire someone that does it for you, right? Of course, anything has a price, but extending the Windows licenses is also quite expensive as well. But the benefit here would be that you can potentially switch the support contract. Yeah, so you are not happy with the vendor that has given you the support. Well, there's someone else that does give you support for a different price, maybe even, or maybe, you know, different service level agreements. Well, why not change? Yeah, you can do this as long as the software is properly maintained, of course, documented and so forth, and open. So that's about software. I want to go a little bit more on the ethical part here. And by the way, if I say sometimes something that sounds a little bit negative, yeah, I'd really say, while I am in favor of open source software, there is really good reason to have also commercial software. Yeah, in some places, because innovation, sometimes it needs to be paid, but open source has different models and not everyone understands those models yet. So I really try to debunk a couple of those myths. Good, so let's talk about other materials, right? So I say here other artifacts. When we talk about immaterial material stuff like books, songs, videos, and even when you do certificates, yeah, certificates for professionals and so on, they are somehow controlled, sometimes by individuals, sometimes by companies that have the rights for them. And then, does it matter for us that we have freedom to them, that we can use those things, access? So the license terms really matter for me. So if it's public domain, that is obviously the best. So that means anyone can use it and can do whatever they want. But it's of course not fair to, in terms of reimburse or compensate the person that has created this material. So there are these open and permissive licenses like CC BY non-commercial and so on that allow you to reuse stuff. And finally, there's proprietary, which I find is a problem. I think we have seen that free and public open permissive licenses work. They work not only in software, but they work also for the Wikipedia. And fan works, this is now one of the things we have this discussion, yeah, where we get when a fan creates some work, a couple of pages about a book because he likes, I don't know, Harry Potter or whatever, yeah, and that's fine. But once this gets money, right, typically the inventor of that has the rights on those figures will sue the person, unfortunately. So that happens often. And I personally think we as a society, we have to think about what we want to do, because the future is pretty much digital, right? And we have more and more of those immaterial goods, right? So it's really tricky. So I would say really the legislation is not keeping up. Derived work is often a gray area. Once it is more widespread, you know, there are some kind of suit down. And I think it's a problem that books become public domain after more than 50 years, after I think the person died, actually. So there are not too many that are, you know, publicly available. And I think the USA at some point increased it. I don't recall, to 70 or something, because there would have been too many books. Yeah, and here's the fun, right? Here is a little paradoxum. You know, someone that calls for freedom, but this is actually a non-free picture. Yeah, I hope I actually don't get sued, but you know, I do this as part of my academic career, so the chances are slim. Okay, because there are some things that are covered. But I found this really fun when on this picture. Okay, anyway, good. So if you like more commercial, right? Let's go away from this really abstract idea. Go talk about commercial. So there is the open source initiative, which is OSI. It's similar to FSF, you can say, but it's formed later, and it values the commercial idea more. Yeah, the idea of it was initially to convince companies to see the benefit of open source. And there is a little bit of, I'd say there are not really like each other, right? FSF does not really like OSI for the reason that FSF, the Free Software Foundation, is concerned about the ethical implications of freedom. Yeah. So anything that threatens computer user freedom, DRM, software patents, or anything, they are against. And they also don't like single non-free software pieces like firmware. Yeah. And here's an example. I had to actually find a good example that is open source, but actually not free software. And I found a good one, I think, TiVo, which is this digital recorder that you get here or in the USA. Actually, you don't get this in Germany because of privacy concerns. Yeah, it's not allowed. It ships with apps derived from open source. Yeah. So, and you get all the source codes, which is exactly as the licenses state, but you are unable to modify any code on the TiVo because TiVo has a signed software execution environment, similarly to Secure Boot, right? So as long as you don't have the private key, you cannot sign your application that you've built, and so you cannot run it on TiVo. Yeah, but theoretically we have the source code at least, so they follow exactly the license in the strict terms. Yeah. Good. Let's now debunk a little bit of myth and the truth about open source. Yeah. Generally, open source is secure. So it is as secure as any proprietary software. And security by obscurity is a misconception, like I mentioned for OpenSSL. So there have been critical errors everywhere, and you can look up statistics to find that the error rate in any commercial product, as long as it's not paid extraordinarily much to add security features, yeah, the error rate is exactly similar. Yeah. By the way, where do you pay so much to make to harden software? Well, for very critical software applications such as nuclear power plants or a Mars rover. Yeah, because if those software fails, millions have been paid, so the people, they can afford it and must afford it because software is critical. Good. Open source is generally licensed and legal, albeit it may be free. The reason is nowadays there are patent pools, and actually even Microsoft puts in patents into these patent pools to protect open source software from being sued. Yeah, so they actually donate those patents, and I don't have forgotten how many patents there are, but it's an enormous number nowadays. Yeah, many companies and even more in the future donate that because they've realized it's not necessarily those patents that bring the money. Yeah, it's something else we can talk about. Good. Big software companies use open source, and I have them on the next slide. And actually, I would say the UK government and the NHS, they both encourage open source a lot. However, whatever they encourage, right, the government not always follows their own course, right? But at least they have the intention to follow it. Good. Open source can come with support. So you have, of course, the developer of open source software, but then you can, in almost all cases, you can pay enhanced support for reasonable software, yeah, whatever software it is. Open source software is typically reliable and has a high quality. Yeah, that is, and I'm talking here about more professional software, not about a student that just uploads whatever project to GitHub. Yeah, we have them a lot, but I'm talking about bigger projects like Linux. And these open source companies or companies that also contribute to open source own their intellectual property, but they share it, like I said, in these patent pools. Yeah, open source software is also often compatible with proprietary software. So it's not, you can basically use one or the other. And I wanted to talk about one popular open source software, which is the Linux kernel, real quick. So the first Linux kernel release was 1991. And of course, you can download it here. It has about 20 million lines of code. That's a lot in the area of Microsoft Windows, of course, except the third-party tools that comes with Windows. Okay, in terms of management, it has clear maintenance policies. It is managed using the Git version control system that is now widespread in industry, used from all the commercial companies because it's simply great. And it has more than 1,300 maintainers for different subsystems. Okay, so there are 1,300 developers that are in charge to merge patches, and they form a hierarchy of tree merges on which at the top is at the moment Linus Torvalds. And yeah, that's a lot, but there are even more contributors, right, in terms of code contributors. And there have been in the past sometimes really rough developer discussions. That's why they had created a code of conduct, yeah, to make a more welcoming environment instead of a toxic community. Of course, communities, whatever communities you may have, you know, that's a different story. It's not necessarily tied to open source that you may say, oh, sometimes they have a rough tone. No, I think it's human when there is a little bit of stress. So that's another discussion, yeah. But just saying code of conducts are great. They work. Good. Linux is market share. In the desktop, you find less than 2%, which is a shame. But when you look in the global market, yeah, you get in the mobile market, 80% Android, and these are more devices than the desktop, right? There exists more mobile phones, I think, nowadays than probably humans on the earth. I don't know how many have been ever produced, but probably more than that. So this is actually why a dominant mobile market. In the embedded system market, when I looked up the statistics, most systems use Linux nowadays. Windows has less than 8%, and the tendency is clear. It will pretty much go away. Windows CE and stuff, yeah, goes away. In high performance computing, which is the area that I'm actually doing research in, it's actually 100% Linux. In the server market, it's widely used. I had been laughing when a couple of, I don't know, 2 years ago or something, there was the announcement that Azure Cloud, which is the Microsoft Cloud, right, is now dominated by Linux. So it's not Windows anymore. And Microsoft has, of course, recognized and figured out why this is the case. And so they actually released and work more with Linux, having this Windows subsystem for Linux nowadays, and so on. So there is some kind of convergence on the horizon, at least my hope. Good. Why are people using GNU Linux? So Linux is just the kernel, right? But you have to use some kind of software on top. So people use often this GNU software collection, and there are many more software tools that are shipped, similar to an app store with whatever distribution you are using. So most distributions, they are actually free, as in freedom, and they cost nothing, but you can donate, which I think is really a great model, a generally great model, because people that have the money, by making money with it, they can afford to donate, and they typically do, because it's not a big deal for them. Yeah, but like students, they can get it for free. And well, they probably don't have to donate, but they might. So it has a long-term maintenance. So you can use 20-year-old programs still nowadays. And it's funny because I had a professor, and he explained to me that he had written once a software on a Unix system, yeah, and it was kind of a vocabulary trainer or something, yeah, on the terminal. And since it was his own software, at some point he lost the source code. So, but the binary that he had since 20 years ago, pretty much, still runs nowadays on Linux. He just has to, you know, add a couple of software, which I find quite funny. Yeah, so Linux and GNU is very mature code, so reliable, in that sense, robust. And it's flexible, and you can run it basically on any hardware system, yeah, that you have, from the embedded market to, yeah, laptops, theoretically, some smartphones, of course. And it's a very big ecosystem, so you find everything easy as in an app store. So now the question, which companies actually use and contribute to open source? Well, here are some names, and I put just some that I liked. Want to, you know, say Microsoft. Yeah, the .NET development has been, I think, donated. Visual Studio, GitHub. Yeah, and Windows 10, I think, has this kind of convergence. Google, IBM even, Intel, of course. So there is a lot, and you know, you can find the 35 top open source companies. That doesn't mean that these companies develop only open source, yeah, but they do a lot. Like Google, for example, you may know about the machine learning hype with TensorFlow, And there is a reason why companies like Google, Facebook, and so on, they release software for free and as open source for the community, which I talk in a sec. So the key question that I typically asked by some people that are not so involved in open source is, how do you actually make money, and why the hell should a company, release software as open source? Well, yeah, there are many ways to get money, to make money from a software product. Yeah. First of all, you can offer an additional professional version which has more features, and then you have to pay for it. We know that from the mobile market nowadays. Yeah, you have to pay for some in-app feature. That is possibility. Next is providing support. Yeah, if you are a commercial company, yeah, and you make money, let's say because you are a designer and you do something, or you render videos on a Linux system. Yeah, and this is your key deliverable, that you deliver those videos to some consumer. Of course, if your system doesn't work, it will cost you something. Yeah, and you will see this is the risk. So you are willing to pay some money as in kind of to make sure that the software that you are using works robustly, meets all your needs, and that's kind of support, right? And then next, so I have them here in the order of how they are typically made. You find them in the wild. Yeah. So most people make money by having this professional version. Then you have a lot of companies that do the support, and then it becomes less and less dominant. So you have some companies that make products using open source software. Yeah. Some people from GIMP and Blender software, which are kind of graphic editors, and one is the video renderer. They make money by selling the products. So that is an option. So they use open source software just as a vehicle. They are not selling it. Next, you sell something that comes with open source software. Yeah, cloud software is here. If you look at Amazon, look at Microsoft and Google Clouds, they use a lot of open source software, and their stack is pretty much built on open source software. And so they are not selling to you, if you are a user of them, the software. They are selling to you kind of an infrastructure, like infrastructure of a service and so on, or software, an ecosystem, a platform and stuff. Yeah, that comes with this free software, but you have to pay as you go, like on a pay-per-use model and stuff. Android, yeah, Google doesn't make money by selling you the smartphone, yeah, with the software for your smartphone. They make money by having a model in which, as you run Android on your phone, you probably use Google search, and they make money by having the advertisement. Actually, this is a huge market, yeah. But some people use it, open source software, in their web pages or in the software itself to make advertisement. That's more rare, except for Google, yeah, which I want to point out. Good. Lastly, you have the service model. Which is this pay-per-go as you go model, kind of. Okay, so what is the benefit for companies that use open source or provide it? Like Google, right? When they offer TensorFlow, why are they doing this? Well, you train developers that may become your future employees. So that is really, I think, one key selling point. Yeah, if you make a new software like TensorFlow, well, if you make it secret, then and you get a new trainee, you have to give them, basically, you explain the software, yeah, until they learn this. But now you put the software out to wild, then you see what's going on, and you find out that there are a couple of people that are actually tightly involved in the software, and they ask the right questions. So you really see, oh, they are doing a good job with the software that they will have to use in your company to make the money, right? So you can directly hire them, and they are trained already. So that's pretty good. And then next is you get contributions from externals that they, instead of saying, oh, I make my own, software, right? So how would you nowadays justify to create another competitor, for example, to TensorFlow? Yeah. How would you justify that? Well, there is TensorFlow, it's open source. It's hard to justify, but if it's closed source, you can always argue as a company, well, we cannot contribute to this. We cannot, make money with it, or we are kind of cut off from a lot of opportunities, so to speak. Yeah, but a lot of arguments in the business go away by having it open. And then if the software is good, right, you would rather contribute to something instead of developing your own wheel. And lastly, trust, of course. All right. So these are all very powerful, I think, motivations. And the reason why I believe that more and more open source can be seen in the wild. Yeah, I want to briefly mention also the open source impact on DevOps. So I searched a little bit for that part, specifically for you. So I searched a couple of quotes, yeah, which I found enough to illustrate it, and also to illustrate generally the value of open source. Yeah. So here it says, open source software has become strategic for organizations of all sizes. Yeah. You know, in an effort to address and overcome complexities, there is this dramatic shift, yeah, where the companies look to multi-cloud and open source technologies like Kubernetes. Yeah, and then we see here open source DevOps tools. They streamline the process of development and deployment. The benefit of open source is enhanced collaboration. It drives innovation and enhances flexibility, yeah, in transforming markets and the needs. Yeah, and the visibility into the code helps enhance overall quality and security. And exactly, it helps companies prevent vendor lock-in from proprietary vendors. So these are just citations from some stakeholders. Yeah, there are many more that you can find. And how would you argue with this and kind of say there's a need to have proprietary software? Okay, let's talk now a bit about the open source specialist group, which is OSSG. So, well, what is OSSG aims? Well, we try to educate and inform about open source and its implications. We provide a reliable, honest, and independent view of open source, of course, with our personal opinion as well, a little bit. We try to encourage the debate and examination of open source practice. We try to reduce the professional uncertainty around the subject of open source. And we try to be a center of expertise. Here's the link, ossg.bcs.org, where you can find the web page. So what are we doing at OSSG? Well, we have organization of events. We have monthly events, evenings that we stream online. And we had pretty much no break during Corona. So there was a little bit of confusion in March, I'd say, but we never canceled any meeting, and we have still our monthly meetings. Yeah, we had to cancel, I think, some physical meetings, yeah, that were planned, like a workshops, but I'll talk about this. So we have some all-day workshops and a conference called OSSG, which is for Open Source Hardware Camp, where you can basically tinker live with some hardware, which is normally in August, September, and that one needed to be canceled because hardware is difficult to do in a virtual environment. Yeah, and then there was the Open for Business conference series of events, but this is more a yearly kind of series. We try to team up more lately with a couple of joint efforts, like the London Open Source Meetup, WISC-V meetups, Open UK engagement, which are about general open practices in the UK. And we try to grow this further with LNVM meetups and so forth. Yeah, that means we are not in charge for those events necessarily, but we support the organization. So it's kind of a co-organization of them. Yeah, while some maybe are organized by people individual or members of the OSSG. So we have our web presence here, as I said. I'll talk about this in a minute. And we do, at the moment, for example, we try to explore the use of Big Blue Button, which is open source, as a conferencing alternative for BCS, and we have been testing it as part of our meetings that we organize, and it works well, I'd say, and you can do everything in the web. So there is no VM for me needed anymore if we use it. Good. So who is in the OSSG? Yeah, we have about 1,600 members. They are mostly entrepreneurial leaders, where the most common job title is director, followed by senior software engineer. So an important point for us has been, or for me, because I'm in charge for the advocacy, is that we try to push this part because there is still a way to go. So what we try to do is we have a blog on our web page where we post articles revolving about open, and we have I don't know 12 or something there, but we welcome really articles around anything, possibly even critical ones, yeah, around open something on the web page, yeah. So if you have something in mind, you know, send me an email or us as OSSG and we put it up. We have a YouTube channel. I'm not going there right now, but we basically all our meetings, our events, they are pretty timely. Typically the next day we upload them to YouTube and make them available. We have a Twitter account, of course, and we sometimes do surveys to understand our members' needs better. But there's some way to go. And there is what I wanted to discuss or raise as questions to you that you can think about it while I then continue with this little presentation. So we have I personally have also realized that we have a lot of passive members. And how to activate those members, yeah? When we have 1,600 members, it's not that we would see hundreds of them in our monthly meetings, yeah? We typically have maybe 20 to 40 attendees in our monthly meetings. Some meetings, of course, has less depending on the topic. Really depends on the topic. And our topics, by the way, they alternate. They change every time a little bit. So how can we do more effective advocacy? Sorry, I can't spell that one. I'm from German, sorry, my excuse. How can we reach out more people? Yeah, and it's not that we really want to contribute, yeah, in the positive sense to our community and UK ecosystem and people. Yeah, we had some discussions when in the committee when, for example, there has been a time when the BCS released some statements about open source, and we later found out about it and like, what are they writing here? Yeah, and not only they didn't consult the OSSG at all as a professional body, but some of the statements weren't quite in agreement, I would say. And I think that's a problem, you know, that any bigger company or any bigger organization like the OSSG even has to deal with. Yeah, and we had been one thing that had been thought about was to kind of create ambassadors that could be listed and it could be speaking on behalf a little bit of OSSG. And they are kind of educated, albeit not, of course, perfectly trained or anything. They are just more listed such that people can contact them in the local area and they get support, yeah? So software companies could get support, better understanding what are the legal implications of open source. And they, you know, it makes totally sense to have a local representative instead of only people, you know, around the area of London, for example, yeah? Okay, so these are some of the questions. So it's really about how can we do more, make maybe a bigger impact and help really more. Yeah. Okay, please think about it. If you have any, you know, opinion, everything is welcome. We tried a lot of things. I can happily share them later as well. But it's, I personally find it's not easy. Yeah, and I know because I'm also in 2 other specialist groups where I have basically no time to spend, I agree, because I'm doing so much for the OSSG. So I know that some passive members are actually doing some work in some other BCS, I'd say, specialist groups, so that's fine. Yeah, but I'm talking about in general. Good. So now I wanted to really talk about my personal experience. So it's all about me a little bit, my own journey to open source. And I wanted to edit to give it a little personal touch. Yeah, if you agree or disagree, let me know. It's all welcome. Okay, so my experience was when about 1998, when I was still a pupil in my last years, I had my first experience with the SUSE Linux 4.2 or something back then in my school. And there have been some pupils that had installed it, and so we used it, and then we quickly actually managed a couple of stuff which was quite fun in the school. So we actually set up, I got quickly into this, and then we set up some school servers for the school, yeah, that the school used for us. So it was kind of fun. So we really helped the teachers, and it was a really pleasant and fun experience. Okay, in 2001, I tried to replace Windows, but back then I used dual boot a lot because I used two software back then, CorelDRAW and some Windows, Microsoft PowerPoint, if I can say. But I also was still, young, and so I played quite some computer games, yeah. So I used dual boot, but then 2005, which was, I was almost graduating, or I had been graduating, I back then used only Linux. Yeah, and I used Windows in the virtual machine, which is the same I do nowadays for software like GoToMeeting. I used a lot of different distributions that are there. I used Debian, SUSE, Gentoo, Slackware, Ubuntu, which I'm still hanging today because it just works for me. Yeah, and I also like the moral implications of open source software. Of course, being still a student, I also liked that it was actually for free. Yeah, so I did not have to steal any more, which I may have done, I don't know, accidentally when I was a pupil and not knowing what I did, copying a game when I was 14 or whatever, right? Which was maybe before that, whatever, right? We don't know. Complicated, right? Thing. So I really liked the moral implications of open source software, and I think it resolved all those or any ethical concerns that I ever had. Okay, after 2005, or since in the medium time, I submitted some minor patches to various open source repositories. So I had some software that didn't quite work, or sometimes there was a bug. I fixed it and sent it to them. It happened sometimes. So since 2009, when I was basically after I finished my studies, my master's studies, and so on, I was really employed. Since then, I developed all the useful software on GitHub, I'd say. And I contributed to various open source projects, and it's actually quite good, just to mention, right? Because companies really look at code contributions, and you can point it to your GitHub, and they see for hiring what you are working, right? Are you a competent programmer and so on? So I think this is also good it's really a good environment for a company, indeed, nowadays, to have those open data, such as from GitHub. Yeah, and newly, or since 4 years or so, I'm involved in open and free certification of competencies in the area of high performance computing, but that also includes a couple of Linux capabilities like command lines and stuff, because that's needed in HPC. And again, I like the idea of having free and open certificates, yeah, such that you can prove that you have a certain skill. Because if you go to somewhere like LinkedIn, and you say, oh, this guy has advanced, I don't know, C programming skill, how trustworthy is this? Yeah, so of course, certificates that are examinable, they are kind of more trust generating. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit the bad experiences, because it's really about being honest. Open source development is sometimes difficult, particularly because you have to discuss with peers. I wouldn't say that the same doesn't apply to any closed source software. It's just that you don't see it publicly, right? You don't see the email conversations in any mailing list or so. And I had my tough discussions, and I still have with some people. But this is a human problem. I'd say it's not tied again to open source, but it's just more exposed. Dealing with license terms can be non-trivial, because some license terms they are called to be virulent, right? So if you try to develop your software, you have to put it under the same soft license as it, which can be a bit tricky. So you have to be sure to do the right thing. The good thing is normally that you are not sued in the open source environment, because you can simply say, oh, sorry, I did the wrong thing. Let's relicense it under the correct term, and everyone is going to be happy, yeah? It's not that you will get beaten. That's at least my experience. Okay, using Linux and open source software, it's sometimes a bit more time consuming when you set up a new system, like you miss drivers for printers. But nowadays I find even it's actually gotten easier, right? Because you plug in whatever hardware in your Linux system and it basically works, even if it's an old printer. While in Windows, you can't do that, or in OS X so easily. But there are still some unsupported hardware, on my ThinkPad that I have, for example, my fingerprint scanner is not working. Actually, the question is, do I need a fingerprint scanner? The answer is no. But it would have been, I would have taken it if it worked. I could have written the driver, but I decided not to. Okay, sometimes to deal with relics from proprietary software, like this Corel Photo Paint or DocX, can be a nightmare. But it is standardized on this, I don't know how many thousand pages. And sometimes you have a little bit of incompatibility where you load a file from one proprietary software into free software, and it looks slightly different, yeah? But generally speaking, that happens with proprietary software as well, right? Loading a Word document from Word 6.0 looks nowadays slightly different. Yeah. What still bugs me, particularly as I have a couple of children, it's 4, only a fraction of PC games is supported in Linux. Yeah, it's getting better. But in fact, just this year, I installed for myself again Windows. Shame on me. But it's just really used as a game machine. And I don't, care too much about the professional part because it's not used for any professional thing. So yeah, that's about it. It's like the Xbox for me, which is also, it would be also. But anyway, going back to the good parts, yeah, I became a more capable computer scientist, a better as a whole, right, in terms of dealing with computers. Getting a better understanding, taking control of software and systems. I automate pretty much all the PC work that I dislike. I can do a lot of programming languages and command line stuff, and I can pretty much resolve any hardware and software issue that I see with a little bit of time. I'd say I'm highly productive. Professional letters, CVs, presentations, what have you. And I can really focus on the content typically instead of the layout, but I can change the layout if I want to, as I like. Typically, to install a new Linux on my system takes about 1 hour, and then everything works. Yeah, so which I find quite pleasing. And I'd say I'd never lost any data since I switched to Linux and open source, but I lost a couple of stuff when I had Windows, in terms of that I had inaccessible file formats, couldn't find a program anymore that used it, and the program was not supported anymore in the new Windows or whatever. So yeah, all the software that I use professionally is free and costs nothing. Yeah, I pay my games nowadays because I can afford it, which is great, on my Windows machine. Yeah, so I do not miss in my professional environment a single program for Microsoft Word. There are all the replacements for it. And I contribute to a couple of software that is now used worldwide, and I find this highly motivating and of course appealing. Yeah, and it's just giving back when you stand on the shoulder of giants using someone else's software. Yeah, just to mention, this slide deck has been created using free software using Ubuntu 20.04, LaTeX Beamer for text setting. One annoyance was that I had this PPTX template for my University of Reading, and I had to convert it to LaTeX template, which took me initially a couple of hours to make it nice. But then I released the template under permissive license. As the text editor, I used Atom, which is basically done by GitHub/Microsoft now. And I use Git, of course, for version management and backup. So it's all protected and pushed to a server. Yeah, to wrap up the talk, Free Software Foundation and the OSI, they support open source software. Open source typically does not cost money directly, but if you make money with it, you either should contribute patches, which means you have hidden costs because it's your time and your devotion, or if you can't code, but you make money with open source, where typically you like some support, you should hire a company that contributes to open source. Yeah, I personally really strongly believe in open source and free for any artifact that is created. Yeah, open source code is transparent, secure, reliable, compatible, and business relevant. And personally, I dream of a world where the digital data is accessible and free for everyone. And training on certification, of course, open as well. And I think actually slowly we see such a transformation, which I found amazing, and into
an area, right? You have YouTube which of course needs to make some money, right, as well. But you get training often for free by watching videos. And we have content creators on YouTube, and we have Patreon, for example, where people pay you by donating money if you do a good job. And I'm really amazed, looking how many people nowadays, they have a proper living, and actually some make an amazing, insane amount of money, right? Even by getting those donations, yeah. So it means for me, such environments, they can work, and such ethical implications, they can work instead of having a copyright. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's too much to ask, that we donate to scientists, right? Indirectly we do via the government, but who knows? Pharma companies, they are kind of one of the things where you may ask about the ethicals, but could go into this. Anyway, you can join the OSSG anytime. It's free to attend the meetings, but of course we welcome BCS members in particular. Yeah, and that pretty much is the end of my talk. I could go there is one thing that I think I removed from this slide deck that I sometimes say. Oh, here's one little anecdote that I forget to say. It's about hardware, yeah? So the OSSG, we have software and hardware as well. And in hardware, we are involved in this RISC-V, but it means there is now this open idea to have an hardware architecture which is license free. So ARM, for example, you have to pay for it, right? And for Intel, you don't know how it's actually made. You have no idea anything. So it's really a good idea that we have CPUs that are transparent, open, and so on. But I think there is a couple of situations which always annoys me personally when you think about proprietary software, which shows to me that freedom and openness really matters. And that's about pacemakers and a gas heater. Okay, I have a personal story from a gas heater, and I have a story from a second hand from a person that has or wears a pacemaker. Yeah. So this person that wears this pacemaker, she said that this pacemaker, she was, I don't know, 25 or something when she got the pacemaker, and when she was pregnant, the pacemaker constantly shocked her because it thought there is something odd with the heart because of the baby, right, that she has. And pacemakers, they have not been made for some person that gets pregnant, possibly. So the problem was that the software, that the company that made the pacemaker, they couldn't change it, right? It is really complicated. And the software is, whatever kind of firmware there is on it, it's really proprietary, and shows she couldn't do anything. So basically she had to get drugs to make her heart weaker or something. So which is what was also a little bit dangerous. Yeah. So if there would have been an open pacemaker, yeah, maybe she as being a computer scientist could have resolved the matter. So, and I wonder if I wanted to ever have something like a neural interface in my brain or something. Who knows, right? Where we are in 20 years, or whatever kind of hardware that is implanted in my body. I want it to be able to understand what it does, possibly tweak it, and make sure that it deals with my privacy as I like it. So that's about personal health, I'd say. The second point is the gas heater, right? I had a fun chat with a company that installed a gas heater, and then I wanted to change something on a gas heater, and there was a management panel. It was a highly digital gas heater. I said, I want to change the interval or something. The company, and then I said, but there's a password, right? And I said, what is the password? I don't know. I bought this thing. So I called the company, and the company said, well, yeah, there is a password. This is a management password. You don't get this management password. If you want to change the setting, you have to call us, pay us, and we come and change it. And I said, what? So I bought this from you. I'm not even renting it. And yeah. And then I said, okay, what happens if you get out of bid? If I want to change the gas company to another? Yeah, then we would secretly, sort of, tell the next company the password for this gas heater. And I said, I thought really that is kind of a little bit like mafia, right? I mean, anyway, it may not be, of course, for any company and for any gas heater, but I had this kind of experience which made me really surprised. So anyway, that's now really the conclusion with a lot of personal remarks and thoughts. And I hope, you have any kind of questions or even critical. I take the aggressive ones as well. Thank you very much for listening.
So thank you, Julian, for his wonderful and very insightful presentation on open source software. So if anyone on the audience have got any questions, I will read it out and Julian can give you the response. So having looked at the question box, I've got a couple of questions. So one of which is from Catherine. So she asks that she works in the NHS and she knows some advocates for open source software, but they are a lone voice in the sea of Microsoft, which is a bit unfortunate. Yes. So how can we push back more effectively with you, Julian? So what would be your thoughts on this?
I think there is always a couple of problems. Yeah, I also see this in the university. If you are on if you have a decision maker, yeah, let's start like this, and you have to make a decision which software to choose. And then you look around in the market and you see, for example, Microsoft, right? And they have their resellers and they have people, and they maybe, you ask them, can you give a presentation? And they say, yeah, of course, they come and they give you some goodies, for example, right? A free meal or whatever, or you can have a look. So they really try to sell their stuff to you. But somehow, right, of course, they say this product works, right? And they exaggerate, right? This is typically, I'd say not all happens, of course, for Microsoft, but for every software, right? And they typically say, oh, our software can do anything. Once you have it, you see all the problems, right? So it couldn't do everything. So there are minor issues, but then you have bought it already, yeah? And that's one thing. There's this discrepancy between the truth and this logged in. Now you are logged in. So, and of course, the decision makers, they cannot admit that they make a mistake. So it's really, I think there is a lot of human problems involved in this one. So, and now you look at the open source market, yeah, and you would say, is there a competitor for this? Yeah, and in the open source market, well, they can't just always say, I come to you and give you any time a talk, right? Because they have to look more on the money, right? So the talks itself might be professional, but you look at it and then they ask, can you do this software? Maybe they are more honest. I'm not saying, that's a general rule, but I'm saying generally they are more concerned and more showing the different perspectives, right? And then, of course, the decision maker, what would they decide? Yeah, they will decide for this product that's shiny and it looks like great, yeah? And that's the problem. So how can you make this better? And that, you have to push hard to be on a board, to contribute to such boards that make those decisions. That's what I think. And then you have to make sure that they look always and ask, is there a free software as an alternative? And is there a company that supports it? Because then it's the next concern that these decision makers have is, oh, there is this free software, but we get no support. It's not true. Yeah, there are companies that can give you support if you ask for it, or you can't, but that's the thing, right? By Microsoft, it's all bundled, right? You can't buy Windows, you can't buy Office or Office 365 without support. Yeah, while in open source world, you can. And that confuses these people that are the decision makers because they don't understand. So also you can invite people like people from OSG or OSSG and so on and explain this. Yeah. And I had my fights in the university as well about this matter. And it's really tricky, right? Because you have these companies, they really try and to push hard for their product. Yeah. And they say, oh, we can make you this special deal. For the next year, it's $10, right? For license. And then you have it, you are logged in, and then it's the year after, it's $50. And then the open source solution would be better. But it's this kind of, it's really a problem in the way people are acting, not knowing what's going on with Linux or open source in general. Yeah. Okay, I hope this answers the question. It's really tough. I think we have to always make a decision that is proper, yeah. And sometimes the decision is, of course, to take proprietary software because it does a good job, Yeah, I really have to be honest. But on the same time, influencing those companies to ask them, why is it proprietary and why does it have to be that way? Because often they will at some point realize that the money is not in the software, yeah? The money is probably in the support area and so on. And how many more money they could make, yeah? It's still this old thinking. I mean, the same in the university, right? They basically, by signing the university contract, everything I develop basically belongs to the university. And I say, basically I say this is not right anymore, yeah, in this nowadays. Anyhow, good, too much thinking. Other question?
Yes, so we got another question by Lawrence, who's asking if you are aware of any open source software which is devoted to developing rule-based expert systems.
Rule-based expert systems. I don't know it by name, but I'm 100% convinced there is this kind of software.
Right.
That's what I can say.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, rule-based expert systems, that there should be and there will be many open source software. I don't know about the maturity of it yet, such that I can advise it, but there will be.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Julian. So we got next question from Matthew. So who seems to be quite strong, who seems to share the same view as you. So he wants to know, like, where do you see how we could increase or improve the adoption and take up of Linux desktop? For example, how widespread the Office suite is, familiarity with Microsoft Office, taught in schools, university, etc., and very attractive subscriptions for students.
Yeah.
Open Office, for example.
Yes, I hear you very well. I mean, okay, let's get started with cloud software, right? I think cloud software in general, maybe Google, Google Docs or Microsoft Office 365. I think there is a benefit sometimes of using those kind of software, particularly when you collaborate, right? In a collaborative setting, I think web browser-based solutions make totally sense, and sometimes you have to pay for it because someone has to host a server. So I fully understand that, and I would say it's a great software. There are, of course, some more open source software that you can use in the cloud, but they are not yet that comfortable, because if they are free, how do you pay the developers, right? I think, though, in the long run, if we talk about 10, 20 years, there will be more and more of those software, and it will become competitive. So now the second part of the question. So cloud is now out for me because, like I said, there is not yet enough developers that work on it. And so now the Office suite. So I think Microsoft is extremely aggressive, yeah, to attract the people in a very young age. And we have in Germany a lot of dispute because that Office and Microsoft is not, it's actually not following the EU regulations for privacy, and the German regulations are actually harder. So in fact, it is forbidden, yeah? So if you take the law, it's in fact would be totally forbidden to take any of the software at all in any public institution. Now, as the politics get money somehow, or supported by Microsoft, I would say, these are the decision makers, right? And they don't understand what they are always doing because they have not the experts. They make the decision to say, oh, we can circumvent those regulations and we still accept those things, which is absolutely wrong and in violation and break of the law, but they're still doing it because, they are manipulated, I'd say. Okay, I'm not trying to generalize too much, so please don't take it like this, but this is just a view, what I observed from the discussions of many people. So it's really difficult. So at the same time, it is a good software, yeah, which has some limitations, and you may want to pay, and you should pay always for the developers. That's for sure. So now, why don't we see more open? Because, and we should, yeah. For example, for my children, I gave my children like a little Raspberry Pi, and they get, of course, Linux with it, and so they get familiar with like LibreOffice, which is I think a rather fair replacement for Microsoft. It doesn't have all the features, but it's quite good. And for all what you need to do, reasonably, it's good enough. Yeah, I personally want to distinguish what you want to do. Yeah, and I say Microsoft, for example, or any this kind of Word editors, they are fine if you do a moderate, complex, median, maybe professional something. Yeah, if you try to write a book with Microsoft or something, having tried things like this, I'd say it's very painful. And it's much easier to use than open source software such as LaTeX, and then make it really professional and get rid of those pain. Yeah, but for small documents, 5 pages or 10 pages, I think those things are reasonable. And then LibreOffice works as well, of course. So why don't we get this? Again, it's a problem in the schools, yeah, and in our school, where my children they also get Microsoft stuff. It's again this kind of influence that the company / Microsoft does. Where are the people, where are the companies here in this country? And they could be, and I absolutely would say, you can probably go tomorrow and say, I'm opening this company here to support LibreOffice in the UK here. And you have your marketing people, right? And you have to have these strong marketing people. Yeah. And the problem is, if you are normally, if you are a developer in an open source environment, you despise marketing, right? You are not good at it because you want to code. And I personally also not good at marketing. I want to code and produce and use something useful, while I personally don't consider marketing really useful, but it is, right? It fulfills a role in this cycle. Yeah. So if we had this company that there are people that really devoted to marketing and really good at it, right? You could probably tomorrow start selling LibreOffice here to a competitive price and go to schools, and put pressure, not pressure in the negative sense, but positive, marketing pressure, trying to sell those products. And I think you could succeed. Yeah, I absolutely think you could succeed. The problem is that where are those companies, right? And that's just people that are marketing expert, they don't understand normally open source. And again, developers normally don't want to work with marketing experts. It's kind of, that's at least my personal impression, right? There is of course a gray zone and stuff, but people are just think differently in the way what they do and how they think a little bit. So yeah, but I agree. So same, by the way, happened in Germany. Yeah, there was in Linux had been used in the city of Munich. I don't know if you have read this in the newspaper here. Has anyone? So many years ago, yeah, the city has started to use Linux. Yeah, and actually they made good progress and they had paid money. And then Microsoft came and said, ours are so much cheaper, and they influenced everything and stuff. And then at some point, the government said, the people, decision makers, we go back to Windows. Yeah, and it's just 5 million or something, yeah? And then once it's done, it pretty much turned out, it's real similar to the Berlin airport, right? Oh, there is 10 more millions you have to pay. Wait a minute, now we are 5 more millions more expensive than if we would have fixed the problems that we had. But it's now too late. We can't pull out of our contract. And I could just always hit my head for that, because how stupid decisions can you make? Yeah. And these companies, they sell you something, and of course you have this requirement catalog. Yeah, they tick the boxes and they say this costs 5 million. And then you think, but they know you missed something in this requirement catalog, right? Oh, but this little feature costs you then 5 more millions. And yeah, I really don't understand. But anyway, there has been now again the discussions to move back to Linux. I think it's really, it's of course a business problem, and I think generally the Europe is really bad in terms of selling software. So we all use a lot of US software, critical software in critical systems, and I'm personally absolutely against that, because I think it means to lose sovereignty. And I think it loses also opportunity in our countries. And generally as Europe, right? Because everyone uses only a single monopoly software. Anyway, too much personal talk, yeah? By the way, you can always email me. Yeah, I think we can share my email later. Okay, so what's the one last question, or was that it?
Yeah, one last question. So seems like there's been quite interest amongst the folks in terms of getting open source software into schools. So Lawrence was asking that BCS could ask for LibreOffice to be taught when doing its accreditation of university courses. Does it ever do so?
It's a very good question. I think, you know, in terms of BCS, what BCS should do, BCS should, of course, make sure to ask for technology that is critical for the students in that sense, or pupils, that they can be used in their future lives, right? So skills they may need in their professional career. Now, in my opinion, absolutely, these skills shall involve, you know, Linux and open source, but also it shall involve commercial software like Microsoft. And at the same, because people, they need to understand there is not an enemy, right? I mean, it's not one or the other. It's very smooth transition, and some things are good for something other than something else. So, but you don't know this, you don't see those two areas if you are just thrilled to use commercial software. So I think to have really competent people that can judge what they are doing, yeah, you need to show always the option, whatever the option is. So I absolutely agree. I think BCS shall request or should request that different software is taught such that everyone can form their own opinion, being not influenced or biased for one or the other, right? Because if you only educate, of course, Microsoft, then people will say, oh, I'm not familiar with this. Oh, now the icon is green instead of blue. Oh, I'm never using this. Right? They are afraid, right? And I think that's what people want. They want you to fear and want to show that you are not competent and get not competent with the software, while this whole purpose of this free, right, of this freeness here was that you want to become competent, right? You want to use software, copy, study, or modify software. Yeah. And we lose this liberty, right? We lose this liberty by being slaves to, you know, a monopoly decision and monopoly software. Okay.
All right. So thank you, Julian, for your insightful talk. It's really refreshing. And Matthew from our audience is really appreciate to hear your thoughts on it as a fellow Ubuntu fan. So today,
Thank you.
So it seems like we have quite a strong community in open source software that we could definitely look into. So once again, thank you, Julian, for taking the time to give us a presentation on open source and what we could do and the different initiatives that the OSSG is taking on. So for more information, yes, you want to say?
Yeah, let me just actually, I think next week on Thursday we have on a series. Oh yeah, a committee video conferences about education. So I have been organizing this session with someone else, and we have one talk about, you know, software in schools. So if you go to OSSG BCS, you will find open source in training and education. It's on November the 19th. Sorry, my mistake. November the 19th. It will be. Okay. So maybe if you have further interest in this, you know, we hear different voices by different people, and yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you, Julian. So if I have time, I will definitely check it out. So, folks, you hear it from Julian. So if any one of you guys wants to attend it, please visit the Open Source Software Group website mentioned. So, thank you very. So in the meantime, so thank you very much for thank you everyone for attending the session, and we hope to see you all in our next talk next month. So we'll keep you informed. So with that said, have a nice evening. Bye.